They tried to arrest me for fishing on my own dock. I know how insane that sounds, but picture this, I'm standing where I've cast a line since I was a kid, and suddenly 3 strangers in black marched down like they owned the place, flashing what looked like a toy badge while my HOA chair stood smirking on shore. The golden hour light was hitting the water just right when I cast my line that Tuesday evening. My father built this dock back in the 80s, and I'd been fishing here since I was 8 years old. Nothing unusual, just another peaceful evening on my own property. That's when I heard heavy boots on the wooden planks behind me. 3 guys walking down my dock like they owned the place. The first one was tall, wearing a black security uniform with patches I didn't recognize. "Excuse me, sir," the tall one said in that fake polite tone. "I'm Derek Holt, head of Lake Security. You need to cease all fishing activities immediately and surrender your equipment for inspection." Lake Security? Since when did my private lake need security? I could see Lydia Hart standing at my property line, the HOA chairwoman for 3 years, arms crossed, watching like she was supervising. "I'm sorry, but who exactly are you?" I asked Derek. "This is private property." I gestured toward the clearly marked sign, "Private Lake, no trespassing." Derek pulled out a badge, not a real badge, but one of those plastic security badges you can buy at any sporting goods store. It had "Lake Patrol" printed in cheap blue letters with a fish logo that looked designed by a 12-year-old. "We have full authority to enforce community standards," he said. That's when the shorter guy, Mason Pike, stepped forward and actually put his hand on my fishing rod. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Hold on. You're telling me you have authority to confiscate my personal property while trespassing on my land?" I walked over to where I keep a laminated copy of my property deed. "See this? This entire lake is my private property, filed with the county and legally recorded." Derek's confidence wavered, but then he rallied. HOA covenants supersede individual property rights when it comes to community standards. That's when Lydia joined the party, marching down in designer shoes, clipboard in hand. "Grant, your fishing disrupts our aesthetic harmony. The residents have complained about the noise, the mess, and the impression it gives to potential buyers." I looked around at the pristine lake. "What noise? What mess?" I catch and release. Mason stepped closer, and I could smell cigarettes and cheap cologne. "Look, buddy, we can do this the easy way or the hard way," he said, reaching for my fishing rod again. That's when I noticed the bulge under his jacket. I looked closer at Derek's badge and noticed something interesting. "Hey Derek, mind if I ask where you got that? Because it looks exactly like the ones they sell at the sporting goods store downtown. Same logo, same cheap plastic, it even says, 'Made in China,' on the back edge." The 3 men exchanged glances. Lydia stepped forward with her clipboard. "The specifics of our security credentials are not up for public debate." I had a feeling I'd just discovered something way bigger than I thought. These weren't real security guards. That wasn't a real badge. The whole thing was an elaborate bluff. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I grabbed my camera equipment and drone from the garage. Working wildlife conservation has taught me that the best evidence usually hides in plain sight. What I found made my stomach drop. There was a massive intake pipe running from the community irrigation system directly into my lake, hidden behind strategically placed bushes. An 8-inch intake pipe jammed into the lake's spawning ground, sucking minnows, plants, and fish eggs straight into the system. While photographing the pump system, I noticed chemical containers partially hidden under a tarp. Industrial-grade containers with hazard symbols, definitely not standard pool chemicals. Around 4 a.m., I heard voices from the community center parking lot. Derek and Mason were meeting with 2 other men, unloading more equipment including additional pumping gear and chemical containers. I spent the next hour documenting everything: pipe dimensions, pump specifications, chemical container markings. My conservation work taught me that environmental violations are serious business. I called Paige Walker, a wildlife enforcement Officer I'd worked with before. Page, it's Grant Reed. I need someone who understands environmental violations, and I need them fast. Just as I packed the drone, headlights flared across the tree line. A van door slammed. I ducked behind the reeds as two men unloaded chemical drums. One slipped, spilling liquid that hissed on the soil. This wasn't sloppy landscaping, this was organized crime. The monthly HOA meeting was Thursday evening. I decided to turn this private confrontation into a public education session. I arrived early with documentation and my laptop loaded with photos from the investigation. When Lydia reached New Business, she clicked to a slide showing my lake. Tonight, we need to address a serious threat to our community's harmony. One of our residents has been engaging in activities that violate our established guidelines. I stood up. Lydia, I think there's confusion about what authority the HOA actually has. I distributed comparison charts showing the difference between HOA guidelines and actual law. Grant, this meeting is about community standards, not individual interpretation of legal matters, she said, clicking to her next slide. I pulled out my property deed. This is my deed, legally recorded. It clearly shows the entire lake as private property inherited from my father who built the original house in 1982. Derek chose that moment to make his entrance with Mason and two other men in matching black uniforms. I'm Derek Holt, head of lake security. We've been contracted by the HOA to enforce waterway regulations. That's when Carol, an older woman from 2 streets over, raised her hand. Lydia, can you explain why HOA funds have been paying secure guard invoices every month, 6 months after the company was legally dissolved? Gasps rippled across the room. Derek tried to seize control. Meeting's over, he barked. But Paige Walker made her entrance. No, Mr. Holt, sit down. You're not shutting this down. She wore her official wildlife enforcement uniform and carried legitimate credentials. Good evening everyone. I'm Officer Paige Walker with State Wildlife Enforcement. I've reviewed the situation and can confirm that Mr. Reed's property rights are clearly established and protected by both state and federal law. She looked directly at Derek and his crew. Any unauthorized interference with private property rights, especially when conducted by individuals claiming false authority, constitutes criminal activity under state law. The room fell silent as neighbors started asking pointed questions about Derek's credentials and the whole resource management scheme. Saturday morning brought the annual Kids Catch and Release Day, an educational fishing event I'd organized for 3 years. But Derek and Mason showed up with a different weapon, whispered conversations and planted suggestions. I watched them work the crowd, approaching parents with quiet discussions that always ended with concerned glances in my direction. Folks, we've had concerns raised about this individual displaying unstable behavior, Derek told arriving families. Mason worked a different angle. This guy claims to be some kind of wildlife expert, but his credentials are questionable, he told fathers helping their kids. But when the first child caught a fish, a 7-year-old girl named Emma, I used the moment to demonstrate proper catch and release techniques. Emma's father Bob, who worked in environmental consulting, immediately understood the educational value. This is exactly the kind of hands-on learning kids need, Bob said. When I explained ecosystem relationships in terms kids could understand while providing technical details, his demeanor changed from suspicion to respect. Derek tried to undermine the demonstration. I'm not sure it's appropriate to be handling wild fish with unknown health status. That's when I pulled out my official documentation. Actually, Derek, this is fully authorized educational work using state-approved protocols. Bob studied the paperwork while parents leaned in. This is real science, Bob told the group. The credentials check out, the methods are solid. So why are you trying to smear legitimate education? Mason lost patience. I don't care about paperwork. This man's been stirring up trouble, making threats. But parents were now streaming everything live on Facebook, and Derek's character assassination was backfiring. Sunday evening, I decided to stop reacting and start taking Control through investigation. I started with Secure Guard LLC. The state registration database confirmed my suspicions. The company had been officially dissolved 6 months ago for failing to pay fees. Yet Derek had been cashing HOA checks signed by Lydia. The filings told a story. Derek had registered the company with nothing more than a rented mailbox downtown. No office, no staff, no equipment. I drove to Carol's house and laid the printouts on her kitchen table. She scanned every line with accountant precision, then slammed her palm against the table. Grant, this isn't mismanagement. This is theft. Organized theft. The HOA had been paying Derek's invoices even after Secure Guard ceased to exist. Lydia had to sign off on all vendor payments. She wasn't just tolerating Derek's fraud, she was facilitating it. Carol had received a fabricated letter demanding $200 for violations of community aesthetic standards, completely made-up violations designed to intimidate her into paying. I examined the letterhead and noticed telltale signs of amateur document creation. The fonts were inconsistent, the seal looked like clip art, and the legal language was generic boilerplate. Tuesday morning, the water sample results arrived. The lab confirmed elevated levels of chemicals banned from natural systems, potent algicides and industrial herbicides capable of stripping life from an entire lake. These concentrations are dangerous to wildlife, and prolonged contact could harm people too, the technician warned. These compounds bioaccumulate in fish tissue and can cause massive die-offs. Wednesday evening, I started making house calls, genuine neighbor-to-neighbor conversations about what was really happening. My first stop was Carol's, where she was examining another suspicious HOA letter demanding a $50 administrative fee. Carol, you're not the only one receiving these fake violation notices, I said, showing her Derek's dissolved company records. Her accounting background helped her understand the fraud immediately. They're using the HOA as a front to extract money through fake fines and fraudulent service contracts. Bob had also received a water usage violation notice demanding $150 for excessive irrigation practices, absurd since he'd installed drought-resistant landscaping. When I showed him underwater footage of the illegal intake system, he immediately grasped the environmental implications. This is devastating evidence, Bob said. The intake is positioned directly over the primary fish spawning area. Our group grew quickly. By Thursday evening, Carol's living room was packed with 8 households, each carrying their own story of intimidation. Margaret and John had unauthorized fence citations for a structure approved 15 years ago. The Williams family showed parking fines for cars in their own driveway. When we totaled the fake fines from just our circle, the number passed $4,000. Projected across the neighborhood, Lydia's racket had drained tens of thousands annually. Margaret shared something chilling. She'd seen Derek and Mason dumping liquid from unmarked containers directly into the storm drainage system feeding my lake. Bob immediately understood. Storm drainage goes directly into natural water systems without filtration. If they're dumping industrial chemicals, they're contaminating the entire watershed. We spent Friday planning our response strategy. Instead of individual battles against fake violations, we would coordinate a collective challenge to the entire HOA leadership structure. Page provided underwater survey results showing multiple intake points, professional installation, and evidence of ongoing maintenance. This was a long-term criminal enterprise. Monday morning, I sent Lydia a carefully worded email requesting a meeting to discuss community concerns, copying Paige Walker and the property management company. The meeting was scheduled for Wednesday at the Lakeside Pavilion. Lydia arrived precisely on time in business attire, carrying a leather portfolio. Derek and Mason flanked her in their ridiculous Secure Guard uniforms, despite their company being dissolved for 6 months. Grant, I've brought documentation that should clarify the HOA's authority regarding lake management, Lydia began, spreading official-looking papers across the picnic table. Lydia, before we discuss your documents, let's establish some basic facts about property rights, I said, pulling out my deed and Derek's business registration records. Derek stepped forward aggressively. We've been more than patient with your disruptions and accusations. We're here to enforce legitimate community standards. Derek, I'm curious, how exactly does a dissolved corporation provide security services? I handed him the state registration showing Secure Guard's dissolution. Your company ceased to exist 6 months ago. Lydia tried to intervene. The specific corporate structure of our contractors is not relevant to community standards. She pulled out an easement document claiming HOA authority over water resources. I examined her document. Lydia, this was never filed with the county. The signatures don't match property owner records, and the notary seal is from a company that doesn't exist. Mason decided to get physical. I don't care what paperwork games you want to play, he said, stepping closer with obvious threatening intent. That's when Paige stepped between us. Gentlemen, I think we need to address some serious legal issues. Mr. Holt, I'm going to need legitimate business credentials. She displayed her official badge. Derek stammered, waving his toy badge. We're conducting authorized security operations under contract. This man has no legal authority, Paige announced loudly. Impersonation is a crime. I revealed the GPS tracking evidence. Derek, remember that fishing net you confiscated? The one with the GPS chip hidden in the mesh. I showed him the tracking data from my dock to his vehicle to a storage facility, ironclad proof of theft under false authority. Lydia made one desperate attempt. This entire confrontation proves our point about community standards. Grant's obsessive accusations demonstrate why we need enhanced security. That's when our community coalition arrived, Carol, Bob, Margaret, and other affected residents carrying documentation of Lydia's fraud schemes. We're here to support Grant and present additional evidence of HOA misconduct, Carol announced, setting down a box of fake violation notices. Paige reviewed all the evidence systematically. Based on what I'm seeing, we have multiple federal and state violations, environmental crimes, fraud, conspiracy, theft, and criminal impersonation. She pulled out handcuffs and called for backup. Derek's arrest was followed by Mason's. Both men were read their rights while the community watched with satisfaction. Lydia Hart, you're under arrest for conspiracy, environmental violations, document forgery, and misappropriation of HOA funds. As they were loaded into police vehicles, Lydia turned back with defeated, desperate eyes, the look of someone who finally understood their victims had refused to stay victims. The federal prosecution moved with methodical precision. Derek faced charges for operating a fraudulent business and theft under false authority. Mason was charged as an accomplice. But Lydia faced the most serious consequences, federal charges including conspiracy, environmental violations, and systematic misappropriation of over $60,000 in HOA funds. The environmental cleanup began immediately, funded by recovered fraudulent payments. The illegal pumping system was dismantled under court supervision, contaminated water was treated, and damaged spawning areas were restored. New HOA leadership was elected within 30 days, with Bob serving as interim chairman and Carol handling treasurer duties. The entire governance structure was rebuilt with accountability as the primary focus. My property rights were permanently established in county records through detailed survey and boundary marking. But more importantly, the community had learned to distinguish between legitimate authority and elaborate fraud. 6 months after the arrests, I stood on my dock watching a perfect sunset reflect across calm water. The lake was healthy again, full of fish and free from illegal pumping noise. Families enjoyed the restored shoreline while children learned about conservation through educational programs we'd established. Carol joined me with coffee, wearing the satisfied smile of someone who'd helped accomplish something important. The lake has really returned to the community, legally this time, she said. We watched Bob teaching his kids to fish while Margaret's grandchildren collected rocks along the restored shoreline. The peaceful scene was everything a healthy community should be. Everyone understands the actual law now, I said, watching ducks cut across the water and bass flicker beneath the surface. My dad always told me water keeps better records than people. And he was right. The truth surfaced, and so did justice. Maybe the real lesson is that ordinary people have extraordinary power when they don't stay silent. The lake wasn't just alive again, it was proof that standing your ground matters. Sometimes you have to fight for your peace, your property, and your legacy. Because when fake authority tries to intimidate you on your own land, the truth becomes your most powerful weapon.